So today I want to talk about how I quarantine and why I quarantine my fish. I'm sitting next to my current quarantine facility, and I know it looks like a tap of dirty water, but it is not, and I'm going to talk about this in a moment. But first I want to talk about why I decided to make this video. I'm constantly seeing quite a lot of well-known YouTubers, large YouTube channels not quarantining their fish. So what a lot of more famous YouTubers are doing is they're buying fish and sometimes temperature acclimating that fish and then just adding this new fish to their fish tank. The most common explanation that they provide is that they purchase this fish from trustworthy sources, local fish stores or online sources, and they know that places where they buy their fish from, they already quarantine this fish. So there is no need to quarantine that fish again, and that's why they're just adding this fish straight into their fish tanks without any quarantine. And this might sound as a solid argument for beginners and probably also for quite a lot of us in the hobby watching this video, because these people are quite famous influencers on YouTube, and obviously quite a lot of people would trust and believe in what they are doing. And the argument that you're buying fish from a trustworthy supplier, from a trustworthy fish store, and that's why you can add this fish straight to your fish tank, basically is completely ridiculous, and it doesn't stand any criticism. But nevertheless, I will start with this argument. So I always buy my fish as well from trustworthy, reliable and tested local fish stores or online suppliers, and I know a few not particularly trustworthy local fish stores and online suppliers. I've tested them and I will never buy anything or at least livestock from them again, because I had problems with sick fish that have already arrived sick, or with low quality livestock. But nevertheless, most of the fish that I buy from a trustworthy sources. I know that the places I buy my fish from, they quarantine this fish, but nevertheless I always quarantine them again. The reason why I do that is not because I don't trust them. I absolutely trust them. I know that they do excellent job quarantining the fish, but the reason why I quarantine fish has nothing to do with their reputation or with the rigor of their quarantine procedures. So the fish that I bring home from elsewhere, from another fish keeper, from a local fish store, from online supplier, they might be absolutely healthy when they're being shipped. When they're being held in their holding tanks, they might be 100% healthy. But the stress of being actually caught, being netted, being bagged, being shipped, or even just being transformed to another environment with water that might be slightly different, with different conditions, with different tank mates, completely different environments, might stress them out quite significantly. And we all know that stressed out fish are prone to disease, and there's a high likelihood that if you bring home a stressed out fish, healthy but stressed out, and you add this fish to your system, to your fish tank, there is always a chance that this fish will spread out, will get sick and spread out a disease to your fish. This fish might get bullied by your fish. It might be weaker than your fish. Its immune system may not be as strong as your fish. It might be affected by so many different variables which will weaken its capacity to adapt to a new place. For example, when I buy fish from fish stores or from online suppliers, they are often quite I would say hungrier than my fish, so they have relatively empty bellies, and they're usually not as well fed as my fish, so they're weaker than my fish from the very start. And to power feed them, to actually make them gain weight, is one of the reasons I also quarantine them. But first of all, I quarantine them to make sure that wherever stress that they are subjected to during their transportation, during their catching, and during the process that takes me to bring them home, is not actually transferred to my fish tanks. So that's the reason why I isolate this fish for a limited period of time, to watch them, to observe them, to make sure that they are healthy, that they're staying healthy over this period of time. I will power feed them. I will make sure that the immune system is strong enough, that they adapted to my water, and once I'm absolutely sure that they're healthy, I will add them to my tank. That's the reason why I quarantine fish. It is especially important to do that if you're buying fish online. Most of the time these fish are absolutely healthy. When they're being shipped, when they're being packed, they might be perfectly healthy. But imagine that they have to spend at least 24 hours on the way to your home. So they spend this time in these plastic bags. They're lacking oxygen. There's quite a bit of ammonia in these plastic bags accumulating, and possibly if you're buying fish in winter, the temperature in their bags and their box is going down, so they're subjected to enormous amount of stress. So by the time you receive this fish in your overnight courier service or something like that, they've been already so stressed out, and if at that point you just literally drip acclimate them and add them straight into your tank, you're risking so much because the immune system of this fish has been completely compromised. So the reasons why I quarantine, not because I don't trust people I buy my fish from, but because I want to make sure that these fish are not stressed out when they're added to my tank. So they spend certain time in a quarantine facility, and I feed them. I make sure that the immune system is strong, that they're used to my water, and that's when I add them to my tank. I also make sure that they have no signs of disease. So how do I quarantine fish? Of course, if I have an empty tank, I would prefer to quarantine newcomers in an empty tank. But quite frequently I don't have an empty tank, or I don't have a space to put another tank, which is the case with a lot of us living in a flat. So I use a regular plastic container. This is just a regular plastic container box from IKEA. I think it's around 100 liters box, depending on how many fish you quarantine and the size of the fish you quarantine. You probably might need something bigger, or you can get away with something smaller. So what do I have in this plastic box? I basically just have a sponge filter and a flow pump to create some current, because most of the fish I currently quarantine in here, there are some tetras and cories. They prefer some currents, current loving fish, so that's why I have a flow pipe, but that's not necessary for different other species of fish. If it's winter, I will also add a heater to this system, but now it's summer and the temperature stays at about 24 to 25 degrees Celsius, so there's no need for a heater. I also add a few other things to make sure that the fish adapt quite well. So if the fish are in a very poor condition, if they have arrived, especially from a 24-hour courier shipping, in a really bad shape, there either went through the temperature shock or ammonia burns or something like that, I will normally add some methylene blue. I'm not advertising this products. You can use any other products, but this is what I have at the moment. I would add some methylene blue because it helps to deal with ammonia poisoning. It helps to make fish to adapt better to a new water and so on. Well, clearly it colors water in blue color, so you can only use it in a quarantine facility. I wouldn't use it in my tank because then I'll have to make a massive water change. I will also add a bit of this Melafix. I've used some other similar products before, but this is what I have been using over the past couple of years, and again, I'm not advertising this. You can possibly use something similar, and basically this is something that treats fish for bacterial fin infections and for generally bacterial infections. If the fish arrive in relatively good shape, which is the case with these corridors and tetras that I have here, I would just add some catappa leaves, Indian almond leaves, because they have very strong antibacterial properties, and they make the fish relax. They make the immune system stronger. One disadvantage, well, could be a disadvantage, is that they color the water. So that's why I have this kind of a brownish yellowish color in this container, and you can't really see well, you can't see them, but not much. So yeah, they color the water. I might add also a few of alder cones They do the same thing, antibacterial, and they also color water, but they have lots of positive properties that help your fish's immune system to get stronger and to restore itself. And I generally do water changes once per day, about 30% or something like this, just to make sure that the water parameters are stable and the water is clean. I will normally keep fish like that for just a week if there is no problems. If I see that they're healthy, there's no signs of disease, and they're feeding well, there's no point of keeping them longer. I know some people like longer quarantine, like 2-3 weeks, even a month of quarantine, or a couple of months of quarantine, but I don't see a point of doing that unless there is a reason. If there is a reason, or if I see that the fish is really emaciated and completely flat belly and it needs to be power fed for a longer period of time, I will probably keep it in quarantine for longer, and I will power feed it consistently until it regains some weight and it could be added to my tanks. But if there's no problems, I will add them to my tank after 1 week, maybe a bit longer than 1 week, but I'm not going to keep, for example, this fish longer than a week because they're healthy. They've been here for almost a week already. I can see that they're feeding well and there's no problems with them, so there's no need to keep them longer in here. Well, at this point, probably quite a lot of you watching this video will say that, well, I've added fish without quarantine to my tanks for years and I didn't have any problems. Quarantine is a complete waste of time, waste of resources, and complete nonsense. There's no need to torture fish in something like this, and I just don't want to quarantine them. And to a certain degree, I would agree with you, because I spent years keeping fish without quarantining them ever. I've always brought fish home. I temperature acclimated them, I drip acclimated them, and I added them to my fish tanks for many years, and I've never had any problems. And I will tell you that probably 9 times out of 10 you would be absolutely fine adding fish to your fish tank without quarantine. But there will always be this one time when you will introduce something really bad and nasty to your system, which will completely wipe out all of your fish. And I had experience of 2 such cases. Both of them with fish shipped overnight with a 24-hour courier. Once the fish arrived with ick. I didn't notice it, obviously, and I didn't quarantine fish at that time, so I added all of this fish to my fish tank, and I had a horrible case of ick there, which has literally wiped out the population of that tank and went out to another tank and wiped out most of the fish in that tank as well. So that was the first lesson for me to learn from, and I learned after that lesson. So I started to quarantine fish most of the time, but I was still not 100% convinced that I need to do that until the second time when I encountered a different problem. So that time I've had much more serious situation. I've bought a few wild brown discus online. They were quite reasonably priced, and I already had a group of brown discus, so I decided to add this new fish to my group. So I bought them online, and I prepared actually a quarantine tank for them, but they arrived at a much larger size than I expected they would be, and the tank appeared to be too small for them. So I thought, yeah, whatever, they are from a trustworthy source. I don't really want to torture them in this small tank, so I will just add them straight to my discus community tank with other wild discus in there. That's what I've done, and they appear to have this thing that's called a whirling disease. That's when the fish is just whirling around, darting around, hitting itself on the glasses, trying to jump out, and eventually falling down dead. And there's no cure, there's no treatment to that disease, and that's what they had. They were absolutely healthy before they were sent to me, but during the transportation, because of the shock of the transportation, they apparently acquired that disease. So I received them with that disease, and once I added them to my discus tank, it passed on to my discus, and I've lost, I think, most of my expensive wild discus because of that error, because of that little mistake that could have been easily avoided. So after that case, I would almost never add any new fish without quarantine to my systems. So yeah, it's about learning through trial and error, and eventually, if you have been in the hobby for long enough, you have probably experienced something like that, and you would agree with me that far too risky to add any new fish without quarantine to your system, to your fish tanks, because you can basically lose your entire fish collection if you don't quarantine the fish, and that's the reason why I do that. Yes, you can get away with that for a certain period of time. You can be lucky for many years probably, until you encounter this one case which will completely destroy all your fish keeping, and will probably decrease your desire to deal with fish for a certain period of time, which was my case after losing all my wild discus to that situation. Alright, so I hope this video was useful and it has convinced you at least a little bit to actually quarantine fish that you bring home from elsewhere before you add them to your fish tank, which will save you a lot of money, a lot of stress, and a lot of bad experience. So yeah, just leave your comments in the comment section, and I will see you soon.